Hi guys, it's Stacy with HandmadeByStacyJ. Today I'm going to show you how to make the Southwest Sunset blanket. And this blanket is really simple to do. It has a 2-row repeat and it's just got these wonderful chevron stitches. And then when you come down to the bottom where the little pointy tips are, I've added some fringe. That way it just helps those points seem a little bit extra pointy. Now you can get this pattern for free on my blog at www.handmadebystacyj.com. Or if you'd like an ad-free PDF that also includes a chart and some printable gift tags, you can purchase them off of Ravelry or Etsy. And I will also have it on LoveCrafts. So all those links will be down below, or you can just go on my website and I'll have the links for it there. Now I want to talk about the yarn that I used for this. Now I am a King Cole brand ambassador. I'm their one of their knitting ambassadors. And the yarn that I used for this is called Safari Chunky by King Cole. So I'm going to bring this out right here to show you. So this is the yarn. Now when they gave me this yarn, they sent me a sample just so that I could play with it and get introduced to the yarn. And it just screamed to me, hey, make me a big, squishy, ripply blanket. Something that's simple where the yarn can really do the shining. And it really does. And this yarn is a chunky yarn, and it is just so beautiful. Now, when I blocked this, I used the washing machine to wash it. I usually would hand wash everything, but this is a pretty big blanket. It measures at 50 inches by 60 inches, so it's pretty big for hand washing. So I decided I'm going to try it in the washing machine. It was just a little bit nerve-wracking because I get a little scared putting my handwork in the washing machine. And then I dried it on low, so I did it on the delicate cycle with cold water. And then I did it on the low setting of my dryer for about 15 minutes, and then I was able to block it, so it got a lot of the moisture out. But I tell you, after I washed it, like, this is soft to work with as it is, but after I washed this, it just really got super, super soft. Now this yarn is 100% premium acrylic, but this is a hefty ball of yarn because it carries out about 311 yards or 285 meters of yarn in it. It's 150 grams, but this is just so wonderful. So this is why I'm using this yarn, because it just called to me to make this blanket. So let's go over the materials that you'll need. Now in this video, I'm going to just be doing a small sample of how to work the blanket, just so that you can get an idea of how those first couple rows are worked, where to place the stitch markers, how to bind it off, which is the trickiest part, I think, and how to add some fringe. But I'm going to go over the materials that you'll need for the entire blanket, just so you have a good idea. Now the blanket that I did ended up using just under 5 total cakes of the Safari Chunky. Now, if you are in a looser gauge than what I do, if you decide you want to make it a little bit bigger or less, your yarn quantities will vary. But there wasn't a whole lot left from that 5th ball. So you may want to consider ordering a 6th one if you are ordering this from any of the stores online. But I do also have a link down below on where you can find your local King Cole stockist, and that's what they call local yarn shops. So that way maybe you can go into a store and actually see them. But what you'll need for the blanket also is a pair of knitting needles, and I use the size 10.5, and for the entire blanket I just use the one size needles, but I use it with the 40-inch total circular knitting needle. I also use a size J or 6mm crochet hook. Now this is my furls hook, and I use this to help me with putting in the fringe at the very end of the blanket. If you have a different type of tool that you use, you totally can. But just so you know, I am an affiliate with Furls, so I will have a link down below so that you can get your own if you'd like one of these. And what that means is, with me being an affiliate, is that I get a small commission if you purchase through my link. Now you will also need, for the entire blanket, you'll need 10 stitch markers. I'm only going to be using 2 in this demonstration. You'll also need a ruler or a tape measure, a pair of scissors, and a needle for weaving in your ends. Now I like this one because it has a pointy tip and it has a pretty big eye, so that way I can get the chunky yarn through it. But this is just for weaving in your ends. So let's go ahead and get started. For the stitch pattern in this blanket, we're working in multiples of 16 plus 2. Now for the blanket itself, you end up casting on quite a bit more. However, for this demonstration, I cast on 50 and I use the long tail cast on method. So for row 1, it's very simple. You're starting on the wrong side, and for row 1, all you're going to do is purl. Now, one of the things about this yarn that I actually really love is that there's these wonderful little black stripes that show up. Unfortunately, my black stripe showed up right as I wanted to start showing you row 2. So I'm going to demonstrate row 2, and if it's hard to see, I'll go ahead and edit this out and just go to the second repeat of it, but I am going to show it to you twice on how to do row 2, but it's fairly simple. So to get started, you're always going to start row 2 by knitting 1. And then you're going to begin the row repeat. So we're going to begin by knitting through the front and knitting into the back. Then we're going to knit 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then we're going to do a slip, slip, knit. So we're going to slip 1 stitch knitwise, slip the second stitch knitwise. Then we're going to put those 2 stitches back onto that left-hand needle, and I leave my needle in the back of it so that I can easily just knit those 2 together. Then we're going to do a knit 2 together. So we'll knit those 2 together, and then we're going to knit 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then we're going to do a knit front and back. So knit to the front, knit in the back. And then that's it for that repeat, for that stitch pattern. So this is where I'm going to put in my stitch marker. And this is a great way to keep track of all your repeats. Just put a stitch marker in between each one. And then as you're working your blanket, it almost seems to go quicker because you're technically only working 16 stitches at a time. And then before you know it, you're at the end of the row of your blanket. So let's do that one more time. Pardon me while I get some more yarn. Okay, so that stitch pattern repeat. We're going to knit into the front and the back. And then we're going to knit 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then we're going to slip, slip, knit. So slip, slip, putting them back on the left needle, and knitting those 2 together through the back loop. Then we're going to knit 2 together. Now we're going to knit 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we're going to knit into the front and knit into the back. And then I'm going to place my other stitch marker in because that stitch pattern repeat is done. So I'm going to do this last one, and then I'll give you directions on how to complete the blanket. Now when you get to the end, where it's your very last stitch, you'll have 1 left after you finish that stitch pattern repeat, and you'll just knit that final stitch. Now to continue with the blanket, you'll just repeat rows 1 and 2 until your blanket measures either your desired length or 60 inches. And now I'm going to do a few more inches of this, so this way you can see more of the shape of it, and then I'll show you how we do the bind off. So I've worked a few inches here so that now I can show you how to bind off. And you'll see that we have 3 pretty distinct little points. Now a blocking, when you're all done with it, just blocking this before you put the fringe on does help the points to be a little more pointy. But also just putting on the fringe is going to help to make those a little bit more prominent too. Now the bind off for this is a little bit tricky because we're going to be binding off in pattern. And you want to make sure that you're binding off with the right side. So you'll begin working just as we do in the pattern, only binding off. So we're going to begin with that knit 1 and then knit front and back. Now when we're binding off, this knit front and back is actually just going to count as 1 stitch. So we're going to take that first one that was the knit, pass it over the knit front and back. Now we're going to work as if we do those knit 5. So we're going to bind off 1 knitwise, and because these are acting as 1 stitch, those 2 will go over the 1 knit stitch. And then we're going to bind off the next 4 knitwise. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we're going to do our slip, slip, knit. So slip, slip, knit, and then bind that one off, and then knit 2 together. This is what helps you to keep the shape so that you get the pointy bits. So then we'll bind that one off, and then the next 5 are knit. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And this last one is the knit front and back. Now when I get to this point, I will remove my stitch marker, and I'm going to bind this off. Now remember, the knit front and back, even though it is technically an increase, when we're binding off, we are counting it as 1 stitch. Now if you were to go around and just bind it all off knitwise, you wouldn't get these wonderful little dippies and pointies. I don't know if that's really the term for it, but that's what I call them. Instead, it would be much flatter. So I'll show you this last tricky bit. So right here, you would begin with a knit front and back. And I do this just a little bit looser because we're taking this, that was the knit front and back, acting as 1 stitch, and passing it over that one. And when you have 4 loops on your needles, that gets to be a little bit tricky. And then you just continue with the pattern. So this is a knit 5, and we are passing these 2 over because they act as 1 stitch. That's 1, knit 2, knit 3, knit 4, knit 5. And then we're back to the slip, slip, knit. So slip, slip, knit, and then pass that one over. Then we do knit 2 together and pass that one over. And then you just continue working with the pattern until you get to the end of the blanket. So I'm going to finish binding this off in that pattern, and I will be right back. So now I've completed my bind off, and the last and final step we have left to do is to add our fringe. So what I like to do is, this is when I get out my tape measure and I measure to 10 inches, and I cut 3 strands of yarn to be 10 inches long for each point of the blanket. So I've already pre-cut these to 10 inches. So I'm going to put this aside, and I'm going to grab my crochet hook. And this is where this is pretty handy. So I'm just going to demonstrate it one time for you. So we're going to insert our crochet hook right where the point of the tip is. And I like to go in just a little bit, so to about right there. So it's not up too tight or too high, Because if it's too high, then you have a knot that's up here and then your fringe kind of points out. And that's not what we want. We want it to point down. So once you have that, take your fringe, fold it in half, put it on the crochet hook, pull it through, and I leave kind of a large loop here. So that way I can take this yarn and it just kind of helps me, whoops, it helps me to guide it into that loop and then pull it through. And then you can secure it nice and tight, and then there's your fringe. And that's it for the blanket. I do hope you found this tutorial helpful. If you did, please give me a thumbs up, subscribe, and check back later because I have some more patterns in the cooker right now. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.